This story begins with a discovery. Tom Petty found out he'd been sold a transaction buried inside a much larger corporate deal. Not his songs, not his masters, his entire recording contract, handed off like property without so much as a phone call. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers had formed just 3 years earlier in 1976, growing out of an earlier Gainesville, Florida band called Mudcrutch. Their label, Shelter Records, had a distribution deal with ABC Records, an arrangement that seemed routine at the time. Then, in 1979, MCA Records purchased ABC Records outright, inheriting that distribution deal and treating Tom Petty's contract like a transferred asset. Buried in the fine print was a clause almost no touring band ever bothered to read, tucked between paragraphs about advances and territory. That clause let his contract move to a brand new label without his permission or even a courtesy call. Most artists in his position would have signed the new paperwork without complaint and moved on quietly, grateful just to keep working. Tom Petty refused. He said no to one of the largest record labels in the country. The question at the center of this story is simple. Can one artist actually beat an entire industry built to outlast him? Chapter 2 begins with Tom Petty doing something rare and bold for a rock musician at the time. On May 23, 1979, he filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, listing $576,000 in debts against just $56,000 in assets. The filing wasn't just about debt, it was leverage aimed at breaking free from his old contract with Shelter and ABC. That same year, he hit the road on what fans nicknamed the Lawsuit Tour, keeping the band working straight through the fight. Fans on that tour wore YMCA t-shirts, turning the legal fight itself into a rallying cry from the crowd. MCA fought back, and the case dragged through the courts for the better part of a year. Meanwhile, the Heartbreakers legally couldn't release a single new song, no matter how finished it already was. By the end of it, MCA settled for roughly $3 million, and Petty walked away with his own imprint, Backstreet Records. The settlement also returned his publishing rights, something few young rock artists of that era had managed to win back for themselves. The fight had cost him money, time, and nearly his whole catalog, but it proved resistance was possible. Chapter 3 is about how the fight itself ended up shaping the record. Producer Jimmy Iovine and engineer Shelly Yakis pushed the band night after night to chase the toughest possible version of every song they had. One track, Don't Do Me Like That, actually traced back to an earlier version from his old band Mudcrutch. At Petty's direction, Jimmy Iovine and Shelly Yakis reportedly drove the master tapes around town every night, refusing to let the label seize them before the record was finished. The album Damn the Torpedoes, released that fall in 1979, borrowed its title from an old Navy command urging forward motion against the odds. It reached number 2 on the Billboard 200, becoming the commercial breakthrough the band had been chasing for years. Somehow, the record that came out of the worst year of his career became his biggest one yet. The album eventually went triple platinum, a scale few expected from a band still fighting its own label. Pressure hadn't broken the songwriting, it had sharpened it into some of the toughest lyrics he'd ever written. Chapter 4 moves to a different kind of fight, the price stamped directly on the record itself. In 1981, MCA began testing a new superstar pricing tier, raising some album prices from $8.98 to $9.98. His next album, Hard Promises, was picked by the label to test that new price point. Petty pushed back, arguing that fans shouldn't pay more just because the label wanted to run an experiment. He'd floated, titling the record $8.98 and stamping the price right on the cover, but MCA backed down before it ever came to that. This wasn't just about $1, it was about who really controlled the relationship with the fans. Facing public pressure, MCA backed down and kept Hard Promises at the original $8.98 price. The album still reached number 5 on the Billboard 200 that year, proving fans hadn't gone anywhere. One artist had just moved industry pricing, a rare public stand that actually worked. Chapter 5 isn't about Tom Petty anymore, it's about what his fight changed for everyone who came after him. Other musicians took notice, watching closely to see what one artist had just proven was possible. Petty's stand became something other young artists could point to in the years that followed when negotiating their own deals with skeptical labels. In 1988, Petty co-founded the Traveling Wilburys alongside George Harrison, Bob Dylan, Roy Orbison, and Jeff Lynne, entirely outside his main label deal. The project let him make music purely for the joy of it, without a single label executive anywhere in the room. Around this same period, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers became known for a relentless touring schedule. Road Crews recalled how the band insisted on a full soundcheck every single night without exception. Fans weren't just buying the songs anymore, they were buying into the story of the underdog behind them. Sometimes the fight itself becomes just as memorable as the songs that came out of it. Chapter 6 moves into a new decade, and the same instinct that carried Tom Petty through the first fight was already quietly at work again. In 1989, while still technically finishing work under MCA, he quietly signed a new deal with Warner Brothers Records, planning his exit years before anyone noticed. That same patience showed up again a few years later in how he handled the rising cost of a concert ticket. As ticket prices climbed across the industry through the early 1990s, Petty kept some of his own prices lower than the standard, a choice that surprised more than a few promoters. Both decisions, the quiet label change and the lower ticket prices, came from the same place, a refusal to let someone else set the terms of his career. By 1994, all of that quiet groundwork finally surfaced. Wildflowers became his first album released through Warner Brothers. The same argument from over a decade earlier had simply returned wearing a different decade's clothes. Radio consolidation, rising ticket costs, corporate ownership, the machine had simply changed its name, even if the fight underneath it hadn't. Fans who had followed him since Damn the Torpedoes recognized the same fighter, standing in a new fight in a different decade. By the time the decade closed, one thing was clear: Tom Petty never stopped showing up for the fight, no matter what shape it happened to take. Chapter 7 jumps forward to 2002 when Tom Petty aimed an entire album directly at the modern music business. The album, The Last DJ, built around a fictional radio host refusing to play a corporate playlist, criticized radio consolidation that had accelerated after the Telecommunications Act of 1996. The record debuted in the top 10 of the Billboard 200, reaching number 9 that year. Critics were sharply divided. Some called it heavy-handed, others called it exactly the statement the moment needed. Musicians close to him noticed he wasn't chasing trends, he was simply aging entirely on his own terms. The album wasn't the biggest commercial success, but it reinforced exactly who he had always been. It reminded longtime fans that this fight was never really about one label or one contract. The machine had changed shape again, but Tom Petty kept aiming squarely at it anyway. Years after the first fight began, the target had moved, but the fighter hadn't changed. Final chapter: on September 25th, 2017, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers played their last show together at the Hollywood Bowl. He died just 1 week later, on October 2nd, 2017, more than 40 years after the Heartbreakers first formed. So who actually won this decades-long fight between one artist and an entire industry? Tom Petty never took down the industry. The machine still runs today, bigger than it ever was. But he proved that one artist's resistance could genuinely shift prices, contracts, and public expectations. His fight became one of the reference points other artists have pointed to since, whenever they've pushed for creative control of their own work. His catalog still sells, still streams, and still finds new listeners decades after these fights first began. The machine adapted over the decades, so did he. Neither one ever fully disappeared from the fight. I mean, maybe that's the real answer. This was never a fight with one clean final winner. It was a rivalry that never needed a verdict, only someone willing to keep fighting it.